You've probably heard of the Ronald McDonald House charity, right? The one that's supposed to help families with sick kids, providing a place to stay while their children are in the hospital. Sounds innocent enough, doesn't it? But what if I told you there's another Ronald McDonald House? A darker, more sinister version, one that most people never see, and one that you can't find unless you're invited. That's how I found it. I don't know my real parents. I've been bounced from foster home to foster home in Detroit, always causing trouble, always running away or getting kicked out, until the next do-gooder came along thinking they could fix me. But they couldn't. I've ruined every chance. Now, at 15, I've got a reputation as a bad kid. I've been labeled. And today, I had a choice, military school or the Ronald McDonald House. I remember the moment my caseworker told me, sitting across from me, looking drained. Between us was a thick brown envelope, my case file. Your reputation precedes you, she said, her voice tired. You've got two options, military school in Lansing, or the Ronald McDonald House, which just so happens to have accepted you. How bad could it be, right? Ronald McDonald House, it sounded ridiculous. What kind of halfway house gets its name from a creepy fast food clown? So, I chose it. We drove into downtown Detroit, the day clouded and dreary. My caseworker chatted, but I wasn't listening. I was thinking about the few things I had left, a backpack full of memories, a photo album of all the foster families I'd failed. But, as we pulled up to the building, something didn't sit right. It was a tall, gray building, wedged between two industrial structures. No windows, no sign, not even an address. Just blank. I hesitated. Are you sure this is the place? My caseworker didn't respond. She just led me to the metal door. It opened after she buzzed, and as soon as the door closed behind me, I felt the oppressive silence. The kind that presses in on your chest and makes every breath feel heavy. The lobby was dimly lit. The only sound was the clicking of a keyboard from behind a glass window where a secretary sat. She turned in her chair and faced us, and I nearly stumbled back. Her face was painted like Ronald McDonald's bright red hair, exaggerated smile, and all. But there was something wrong about it. Something hunger in her eyes. She wasn't a nurse. She was something else. I should have laughed. Should have thought it was a joke. But the chill creeping down my spine wouldn't let me. I couldn't look away from her eyes. Is something wrong, sweetie? She asked, her voice muffled by the glass. I tried to speak, but couldn't. All I could do was stare at her, as if she could see every ugly part of me. My caseworker handed over my paperwork, chatting with the clown-faced nurse as if everything was fine. This will be good for you, the nurse said, her voice dripping with something I couldn't name. I didn't want to stay. I needed to leave. But before I could say anything, a door slammed open in the back of the room, and I froze. A shrill laughter echoed down the hall so high-pitched it made my teeth ache. Here comes the welcome committee, the caseworker said, her smile hollow. I didn't want to believe it. This wasn't real. But then my caseworker did something I never expected. She patted my shoulder and said, "Don't worry, honey. It'll be different this time. You'll feel right at home." "No," I shouted, desperate. "Please don't leave me here." She didn't even flinch. "I've never liked clowns," she said coldly, turning to leave. The door slammed shut behind her, and I was alone. The laughter grew louder. A dark shadow crawled toward me from the hallway, and I could see just for a moment figures moving within it. Figures with painted faces and hungry eyes. I ran for the front door, but it wouldn't budge. I pounded on it, screamed, begged. I screamed for anyone to hear, to save me. And then I saw her, the nurse, behind the glass again, smiling at me with that same sinister grin, her eyes devouring me. "Don't worry, sweetie," she whispered through the glass. "You'll fit in just fine here." And all I could do was scream. And then they answered, their laughter echoing through the dimly lit hallway. A whole group of nurses appeared, their faces painted like Ronald McDonald. Some were men, some women, but all with the same terrifying, twisted makeup. Their bright red hair framed their faces like a nightmare. In the sickly light of the lobby, I saw the gleam of metal tools clutched in their hands, tools that made my stomach churn. And then, rolling in behind them, came a pair of nurses pushing a metal table, complete with restraints. The sight of it sent a jolt of panic through me. "Get the hell away from me!" I screamed, my voice cracking. I pounded at the metal doors again, desperately trying to escape, but it was no use. They surrounded me, their hands cold and unyielding as they grabbed me, laughing as I thrashed and screamed. They held me down, slamming me onto the table, strapping me in with merciless efficiency. I looked around, my mind racing. "Let me go," I screamed, but they only laughed harder, each sound more maddening than the last. They rolled me through an open doorway and down a long, endless hallway. The walls seemed to stretch on forever, the laughter growing louder with each step. They waved scalpels, razors, and needles mere inches from my face, just to make me flinch, just to hear me scream. And when I did, their laughter grew even more maniacal. The last thing I remember, before one of them finally injected me, was the feel of gloved fingers forcing their way into my mouth, pulling at the sides, distorting my scream into an unnatural grin. My vision blurred, and through the tears and sweat, I saw the twisted nurse's face, hot rancid breath in my face as he whispered, "I love to see you smile." And then, as the maniacal laughter wound down like a dying record player, everything faded to black. When I opened my eyes again, I was blinded by bright lights overhead, their harsh glow making my groggy eyes ache. I turned onto my side, my body stiff and uncooperative, and looked around. I was in a small, sterile cell, all white walls, covered in scratches and stains, a small drain in the corner of the floor, and a door with no windows. My backpack was lying on the floor near the door, but something was wrong. I tried to sit up, but my body felt like rubber. My vision swam, dizzying and unsteady. I looked down and realized with a sickening lurch that I wasn't wearing my clothes anymore. I was dressed in a dirty, yellow hospital gown, covered in the grotesque pattern of Ronald McDonald's face. There was nothing underneath. Faint, muffled sounds echoed through the building. Screams, I could hear them. Distant, but unmistakable. I tried to stand, but my legs buckled beneath me. I collapsed onto the floor, crawling toward my backpack. I tried to open the door, but it was locked, of course. I slumped beside the backpack, my hands trembling as I unzipped it. Inside, there was nothing but the photo album. My heart pounded as I pulled it out, my mind racing. The photos I had kept, pictures of my foster families, were gone. In their place were something much worse, crime scene photos. Each one showed a family I had lived with, brutally murdered, their bodies covered in blood. My stomach twisted, bile rising in my throat as I turned the pages faster. Each page was a new nightmare, a new family, a new massacre. I recognized the faces of the people who had taken me in, and now they were gone. And then, I came to the last few pages, a photo of a house at night, its windows dark. Then, the inside of the house, a faint light coming from one doorway. A photo of my caseworker brushing her teeth in a bathroom mirror. A photo of her looking at the camera, her face frozen in horror. The last photo was of her, naked, covered in blood, contorted unnaturally in a bathtub. I flipped the page, my hands shaking uncontrollably. Inside the back cover of the photo album, scrawled in shaky handwriting, were 3 words, "You never existed." My stomach lurched, and I threw the book to the floor, crawling to the drain in the corner. I vomited, the realization sinking in like ice water. They had killed everyone who had ever known me, wiped away any trace of my existence. More screams echoed in the distance, and I knew I had to get out. I wiped the vomit from my face, my body still weak and unsteady, and crawled back to my backpack. I had to hope they hadn't found it. My secret weapon was still there. I reached into the front pocket, fingers scraping the fabric. There they were, the lock-picking pins. I told you I was a bad kid. I listened closely. Footsteps were approaching. I had to work fast. I juggled the door handle with one hand, picked the lock with the other. It was easier than I expected. Holding the door handle, I slowly pulled myself to my feet. My legs were shaky, but I managed to stay upright. I cracked the door open just a little. A clown nurse darted past, his footsteps fading into the distance. He didn't notice me. I stepped into the hallway, the air thick with the scent of decay. The screams were louder now, coming from every direction. I had to keep moving. I passed door after door, each one hiding something horrible behind it. At one, I heard the faint cry of a child. I stopped for a moment, my hand on the door handle, but then I kept moving. I couldn't risk being caught, and then I passed a set of white double doors. The screams grew louder. I had to find a way out. I stopped for a moment, my eyes locking onto the words, "Play Place," scrawled in tall, thin letters across the width of the double doors. The sound of screams, distorted and frantic, echoed from behind them, multiple voices, all writhing in terror. And then, through the cacophony, the shrill, insane laughter of the clown nurses pierced the air, sending a cold shiver down my spine. I was terrified to know what kind of horror was unfolding inside, but I knew I couldn't linger. I turned away, my heart hammering in my chest, and spotted a stairwell symbol above a door. Without thinking, I rushed toward it. As I opened the door, I glanced back and saw the clown nurses emerging from the play place room. Their white nurse uniforms were drenched in streaks of blood, the dark stains almost glowing in the dim light. I shoved myself into the stairwell, praying they hadn't seen me. The stairs were dimly lit, the air thick with the smell of rust and decay. I glanced behind me at the door, had just closed dread number 5 painted across it. I had to get to the ground floor. Each step I took echoed like a death knell in the silence, the distant screams now replaced by a low, almost comforting hum, like the sound of pipes in the walls. I descended, one footstep at a time, until I reached the door labeled with a large number 1. The stairs seemed to descend further below, but I stopped here, peeking through the door. More white hallways, no sign of the clowns. So far, so good. I stepped through the door and into the hallway, my ears filled with the buzz of fluorescent lights above. No screams on this floor, just the relentless hum of the lights. I walked until I reached the end of the hall, where another set of double doors loomed. A large red cross, like the kind you'd see on a lifeguard stand or a first aid kit, was painted across the doors. I pressed my ear against the door. All I could hear was a slow, rhythmic pulse, like a machine at work. A beeping sound, like something from a hospital room. I knew I shouldn't open it. I knew I should keep moving. But something inside me, a dark curiosity, urged me forward. I turned the handle. It wasn't locked. I peeked inside. The room was cavernous, the walls lined with rows of hanging wires. Fluorescent lights flickered above, casting sickly shadows, and then I saw them, kids, all dressed in hospital gowns like mine, their bodies stretched out on white wooden crosses, their limbs bound. They were silent, their heads drooped forward, eyes either closed or staring into the void. Some of them twitched, but most remained still, their bodies swinging ever so slightly, the crosses creaking on the wires above them. But those weren't wires, they were intravenous tubes, each one hooked into the kids' wrists, draining their blood. I gagged. The bile rose in my throat, and I couldn't hold it back. I vomited right there, the stench of blood and death overwhelming me. In the center of the room, a massive steel cylinder stood, collecting the blood from the tubes. The rhythmic pulse of the machine was the sound of life being drained from those children. I opened my mouth to scream, to shout in anger, but all that escaped was a strangled, horrified whisper. What the hell? That's when the alarms went off. The sound was deafening, like police sirens from hell. They must have realized I was missing. I slammed the door shut and glanced around, my heart racing. No sign of anyone yet. I ran. I bolted for the stairwell, my feet pounding against the floor. But as soon as I entered, I heard it, the laughter. The clown nurses were coming, their footsteps echoing above me. I stumbled down the stairs, my heart thudding in my chest. I must have descended 3 more stories before I reached the basement. The hallway here was dark, like a sewer, with small bulbs hanging every 10 yards or so. The air reeked of decay and rotting flesh, the stench growing stronger with every step. The laughter behind me continued, growing louder. I glanced over my shoulder and saw them clown nurses, running after me, their faces twisted into grotesque grins, knives and needles gleaming in their hands. I pushed myself harder, adrenaline surging through my veins. I ran past alcoves filled with rotten, stabbed corpses, but I couldn't stop. I couldn't think, I just had to escape. I turned a corner and saw a metal ladder leading up the wall. I grabbed it, my hands slick with sweat, and began to climb. My head slammed against the ceiling, but I pushed on, my heart racing, the laughter growing closer, louder. I could feel their footsteps behind me, shaking the very ground beneath me. They were almost there. I pushed up, my hands trembling, until the ceiling gave way. The manhole cover above me slammed into the asphalt with a sickening thud, and I crawled out into the night. I scrambled to push the cover back into place, blocking out the sound of the clowns below. I lay there, gasping for breath, the rain soaking through my gown. The sky above was turbulent, a welcome sight compared to the hell I had just escaped. I looked around abandoned buildings, broken glass, no lights, no signs of life. The distant wail of police sirens echoed somewhere far off, but it didn't matter. It was silence, an urban ghost town. I pushed myself to my feet, pain shooting through my leg. I looked down and saw the slash on my ankle, a deep gash where one of the clowns had cut me. I limped, dragging my foot. As I stumbled forward, "Hello," I called out, my voice weak. The only answer was a distant roll of thunder. "Somebody help me," I screamed, my voice breaking. My foot landed on something soft and mushy. I looked down a newspaper, soaked in rain. I picked it up. The ink faded, but I could still make out the date, July 13th, 1992. I dropped it, my stomach twisting in dread. I kept walking. Didn't anyone hear me? I screamed again, but my words faded into delirious sobs. I stood still for a moment, rain soaking through my thin hospital gown, the world around me cold and silent. The nightmare wasn't over, it was just beginning. I shivered as the wind howled around me, the cold biting into my skin. Then, through the dark, I saw a faint yellow light flickering in the distance. It was unmistakable, a McDonald's, of course. I limped toward it, my steps unsteady, each one more painful than the last. When I reached the building, I noticed that the only light was coming from the glowing M in the sign, the rest of the place shrouded in darkness. I crept toward the broken windows, my heart racing, and peered inside. The interior was swallowed by shadows. I turned and looked at the place, the towering structures of colorful tubes for kids to crawl through. But there was something else sitting there, something that made my stomach twist. The Ronald McDonald statue, the one every kid has seen. The one where you could sit beside him and he'd look like he had his arm around your shoulders. The one that was supposed to be comforting, but now, it only made my skin crawl. The doors were unlocked. I pushed them open, stepping inside, away from the rain, into the eerie silence. The place was frozen in time. The decor was stuck in the 80s white plastic booths, red and yellow tiles, all of it worn and faded. The wind whispered through the broken windows, carrying with it the scent of rot and decay. I noticed something on the front counter, something that didn't belong in this forgotten place. A black rectangle. I stepped closer, and my breath caught in my throat. It was a laptop, nearly new. A soft, delirious laugh escaped me. I knew what I had to do. I grabbed the laptop and walked outside, sitting beside the Ronald statue. The rain fell in sheets, soaking the keys, but I didn't care. There was nothing left to do now but wait. As I opened the laptop and began to record this story, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw him. Ronald. He was watching me. His painted face twisted into a grin, his eyes fixed on the screen. He was laughing now. I froze, my fingers hovering over the keys. His laughter echoed in my ears, a sound that was both maddening and hypnotic. There was nothing I could do but join him.